The highly anticipated truce between Israel and Hamas is now underway. This is the scene live looking over Gaza from Israel. A 4-day temporary ceasefire appears to be holding ahead of an anticipated hostage prisoner swap later today. It follows weeks of the most intense fighting in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Let's cross over now to our special correspondent, Ibrahim, who's following the story for us in Jerusalem. Great to see you again. So the temporary ceasefire came into effect several hours ago. Are the two sides adhering to it?
We are in the very early hours of what is a very, very delicate temporary ceasefire. And while there have not been any major bombings, rocket fire, or artillery strikes, both sides accuse each other of minor sporadic violations. But so far, the ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire, seems to be holding, but the situation is very volatile. It's unclear if Hamas has control over all of its fighters in the Gaza Strip, and they're of course not the only armed militant group in the Strip. And so 4 days of a temporary ceasefire, a lot could go wrong and a lot could happen. There's also the question of what if the Israeli military within these 4 days identifies a high-value target. It will then be confronted with the difficult choice of going after that target or continuing with the ceasefire. The situation on the ground for civilians also very volatile. Fears from the Israeli side that civilians in the south will want to start heading to the north, as we touched on in that report. And they are warning them with leaflets not to do that, not to go back to the north, as the Israeli army says that is still a very dangerous part of the Gaza Strip for civilians.
How are people in Israel feeling now that the pause in fighting is underway?
It's a mixed feeling. There's, of course, a lot of relief and joy at the hostages that will hopefully be released starting today. It's an emotional roller coaster, especially for the hostage families who are, as we speak, getting phone calls, waiting for phone calls that could be the ones that tell them that their loved ones are on their way. There's also a sense of dread that even with this deal, we're only talking about 50 women and children out of more than 200 hostages believed to be held by Hamas, and not everyone will be coming back under the terms of the deal as it stands at the moment. There's also criticism for that deal coming from a minority in Israeli politics, the right wing, a minority but a very vocal one that has been from the beginning staunchly opposed to this deal, claiming that it plays into Hamas's advantage and that the militant group will be using this time to recalibrate, regroup, and that this ceasefire puts it in a better position to attack Israel and to delay Israel's timeline to reach its goals, which is ultimately eradicating Hamas completely from the Gaza Strip.
This is planned for 4 days, but Israel's military says it's already preparing for what it says are the next stages of this war. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, we have a very clear message from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that the war is not over and that the fighting is expected to continue once the ceasefire, the temporary ceasefire has expired. And that's because, according to Israeli officials, the goal to eradicate Hamas completely is yet to be achieved. Up until the very beginning of the ceasefire, we saw intense fighting and bombardment of the Strip, and according to the IDF, until the very last minute, they say they were still in the process of destroying Hamas's tunnel network. So as far as the Israeli side is concerned, this war will continue after the temporary ceasefire, although they have also signaled that they are willing to extend the temporary ceasefire by 1 day for 10 hostages. So it's unclear what exactly will happen, but as far as the Israeli side is concerned, the war is by no means over and their goals have not yet been achieved.
Thanks, Aya. DW correspondent Ibrahim in Jerusalem. Well, let's cross over to Bushra Khalidi, policy lead at Oxfam. Thank you for joining us on DW News. Tell us, how much aid can your organisation deliver in these 4 days, and what are you actually focusing on?
I mean, you have to understand that many of our organizations actually operate from Jerusalem. We usually have responded to previous escalations and responses in Gaza through Kerem Abu Salim. We're not used to operating aid operations, and this is an unprecedented humanitarian response through Rafah. Supply routes have to be established, registrations have to be established for those who don't have, like Oxfam. Then you need to have agreements with partners that are operating. Most of our organizations operate through trusted partners that work inside the community, that know the communities. They have all been affected. They have all lost their homes, lost relatives, and many of them have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. So it's an extremely challenging response and logistical operation, but it's also not enough. The difference that we're seeing is that there's no bombardment, and that, in addition to people being able and children being able to play outside, people can also sleep. People haven't slept properly in the last 2 months, and I don't think any of us can have a real understanding of what that means to not be able to have a one good night's sleep. So I'm hoping that Gazans today have a good night's sleep without the sound of drones and the sound of bombardment that's constant over their heads. In terms of delivering, I hope that also delivery, essential delivery is needed in the north, and this happens, but we haven't seen any text of the agreement. So we don't know whether, for example, it has been agreed that there would be safe passage provided on both ways. Now we're seeing that Israel has forbidden people to go, families to be able to go back to their homes, check on their homes, even bring some clothes. Winter is approaching. People haven't prepared to be displaced for this amount of time. Right. I have family in yes.
No, go ahead. You were saying you have family there. What have they been telling you about how their
Gaza,
life is there?
The question is that they don't trust Israel to respect the truce, because they didn't in 2014, and they don't respect because of what happened on the evacuation routes in the last 2 months, where people, or in the last couple of weeks, let's say, where people were shot at, they were interrogated, they were detained, they were humiliated, they were asked to walk with their arms up, holding their IDs when evacuating to the south. What are we going to see on those routes? And my family, they should be able to go back home to get some clothes. Maybe they have some food that they had, stocked, knowing that the war was approaching and not knowing that they'd be displaced. My family has decided not to go to the north, but many people will have tried. And now we've just seen the leaflets. So what is that agreement, and why are people not being allowed to go back to their homes? Is another, question. The aid is not enough. It doesn't. I just want to add that 4 days of no bombardments does not rebuild schools. It doesn't rebuild homes. It doesn't allow women to deliver safely in a dignified space. It doesn't allow people to recover from critical, injuries. We're talking about tens of thousands of critical injuries. So, right. For us, it's almost insulting, really, as a humanitarian organizations to be asked to deliver this amount of aid for 2.2 million people in a very short amount of time. What are we really supposed to? How are we supposed to deliver real?
Bushra, I just want to ask you very quickly. So far, the truce has held up. We're only several hours into it, but it appears that, it's holding up for now. You're saying it's not enough aid. You also mentioned logistical challenges and the reality for people on the ground. Tell us a little bit more about that logistical issue. Once the aid does get into Gaza, how is it distributed and how is it getting it to people?
So As for Oxfam, we're still operating through partners. So we have, for example, a partner called Jazur in the north that helps pregnant women. They will be expecting some medical supplies to be provided to shelters because we have pregnant women actually delivering in shelters because the hospitals in the north have been non-operational. We know that there are some humanitarian teams coming in, but we have no idea of what the size is. The UN will be providing that information, that data later, so to avoid confusion on the number of trucks and how those were distributed. Mainly, those are being done through a few international humanitarian organizations. The United Nations and the Egyptian Red Crescent, of course, that is delivering a big part of this operation. But again, you can only imagine the logistical challenge on damaged routes, no electricity, no running water. It's the same challenges that we've been facing in the last couple of weeks that will be met these last 4 days.
We'll have to leave it there. Thanks, Bushra Khalidi, Policy Lead at Oxfam.
Thank you.
The German president has received German nationals who were able to leave Gaza in the past few weeks at a private meeting in Berlin. Frank-Walter Steinmeier was given first-hand reports about the situation in the territory. Among those talking about their experiences were families of Germans of Palestinian descent, as well as a doctor who worked at the Al-Shifa hospital, which has been the focus of Israeli attacks in recent days. More than 200 German nationals have left Gaza through the Rafah border crossing to Egypt. Well, for the families of those hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, the past few weeks have been riven with despair and trauma. Now the truce could see some of them safely returned at last.
After weeks of waiting, the families of hostages hope their loved ones will come home soon.
I want to hope, I hope that it's going to happen. We've been on such a roller coaster for certainly the past week, but since October 7th, between despair and trauma and hope, I just want to see the children come back.
The Hamas terror group has agreed to release 50 civilian women and children, of which 13 are to be released in the first batch on Friday. In exchange, Israel is set to release 150 Palestinian prisoners, mostly females and teenage males, over the course of the truce. The deal, mediated by Qatar, also includes a 4-day pause in fighting in both the north and south of the Gaza Strip, as well as increased humanitarian aid. Even though the agreement is considered a breakthrough, both sides have remained cautious about saying too much before it materializes.
Based on current circumstances with the start of this truce, our main hope is that this humanitarian truce will give us all the opportunity to look into the bigger task, which is to implement a permanent truce and achieve long-lasting peace.
Efforts are being made to extend the truce beyond the 4-day period, but Israel insists it will resume its military operation in Gaza until it has eradicated Hamas.
I'm now joined by Amnon Aran, who is a professor of international politics of the Middle East at City University in London. Welcome to DW News. So tell me, how much of an accomplishment, in your opinion, is this temporary ceasefire from a political perspective?
Well, I think, first of all, the definition, I think, is a temporary pause rather than a ceasefire. I think from a political point of view, it is a significant achievement primarily for Qatar on the one hand, and for the United States on the other hand, that they have been able to bring Israel and Hamas to agree to this deal, assuming, of course, that the first group of hostages is indeed released at 4 o'clock Israeli time. So just to reach that agreement from the point of view of those two states, I think is a significant political achievement.
Now, there are mounting calls internationally for a longer lasting, you called it a pause there, it's a temporary pause, but a longer lasting ceasefire, we'll say. How would that impact Israel's aim of fighting Hamas?
So this is where really there is a divergence. The Israeli government has repeatedly insisted that what we are seeing today for the next 4 days at this point is a pause rather than a ceasefire, simply because it is concerned that a ceasefire will effectively constrain it, perhaps even prevent it from achieving its stated goals, namely to eliminate Hamas's military capability and its ability to govern over the Gaza Strip. Those are the two key aims that the Israeli government has set for itself. The assessment in Israel is that a ceasefire will effectively prevent the government from achieving those goals.
Okay, but if they're saying that, what other alternatives are there?
Well, I think at the moment, the Israeli government and the Israeli military are trying to use this period to regroup, to refresh their military operational plans. We've seen the Israeli army spokesman declared that the northern Gaza Strip is still a military zone, and that's really the background for the Israelis at the moment preventing or trying to prevent from Gazans to return to their homes. But I think at the same time, the situation is very fluid at the moment in two respects. First of all, there is still mounting pressure in Israel to increase the number of hostages that will return from being in captivity with Hamas. To do that, Hamas will try and prolong the period of a pause, and from its point of view, to try and translate the existing pause into a ceasefire. So that's one set of pressures that the Israeli government is facing. And the other one, of course, is the humanitarian toll that has been exacted on the Gaza Strip, especially in the context of the war. So the Israeli government at the moment will have to strike a balance between, on the one hand, achieving the strategic goals that it set for itself, namely eliminating Hamas's military capability and its political ability to govern the Gaza Strip, but on the other hand, resisting the pressure that will mount to try and secure the release of more hostages, which would mean prolonging the pauses, perhaps even reaching a ceasefire, which seems to be something that will stand in the way of achieving those strategic goals.
From the perspective of Hamas, what does this pause mean for them, and how is it impacting them?
Well, for Hamas, the pause is a very positive development on two fronts. First of all, it allows Hamas to regroup and potentially also to replenish some of its munition, assuming that it has some smuggling routes still available to it. But I think on the broader strategic level, the main bet of Hamas to actually remain in power is to try and withstand the Israeli assault, assuming that Israel will now continue into the central and southern part of the Gaza Strip, eventually bring the Israelis to have to agree for a ceasefire. And at that point, Hamas still being, if you like, standing on its feet, although perhaps severely damaged. As long as Hamas is able to remain, if you like, standing on its feet politically and militarily, if a ceasefire is declared, it will be in a good position from its point of view to restore its rule over the Gaza Strip. And it will also be able to claim that Israel has not been able to defeat it, notwithstanding the vast amount of firepower that it has used since the beginning of the war. So for Hamas, actually extending the pauses into eventually a permanent ceasefire, and then, of course, increasing the pressure by civilians going back to the northern Gaza Strip would put the Israelis in a very difficult position.
Amnon Aran, Professor of International Politics from London, thank you.
8-year-old Navi and 3-year-old Yahel, siblings snatched by Hamas terrorists, their whole family ripped apart. Now they may just be coming home. For grandfather Gilad, the beginning of the end of a living nightmare.
I go to hug them, kiss them, and I hope and probably they will be in hospital in the first time to get the checkup and everything. But I don't know. I didn't think what I got to do and what I'm going to say.
The family, descended from Holocaust survivors, are among those Hamas hostages who hold German citizenship. Last month, relatives travelled to Berlin to pressure German officials to help bring their loved ones home. In the centre of the German capital on Thursday, a street artist drawing attention to their cause.
These are all our children. This barbaric Hamas kidnapping shows who we are dealing with. We should not forget it, and neither should the whole world.
Now, all the families at the heart of this tragedy can do is wait.
Now, a little earlier, my colleague Terry Martin spoke with Sharon Lifschitz in Tel Aviv. Both her mother and father were taken hostage by Hamas during the terrorist attacks on October 7th. Her mother was released last month, but her father is believed to still be held by Hamas. We started by asking her how her mother, Yochved, is doing.
My mother is doing very, very well. Her heart is under Gaza, as she say, but her body is strong, her mind is strong. She's quite involved in preparation for the return of other hostages, and she's advising from her own experience. So she's busy supporting other families that have hostages, supporting the Ministry of Health and other bodies within Israel as they prepare for the return of hostages, and in particular, very elderly hostages.
And tell me, if you would, about your father, Oded. He's 83 years old, I understand, and I understand he was injured when Hamas kidnapped him.
Yes, my father was at home with my mom in the secure room, which is their bedroom. He was shot through the metal door, and we didn't know that until my mother came. We know that he's in Gaza. We know that he's 83 and quite frail, and we know that we don't know if he's alive or dead 49 days into the event.
So I gather you have not received any sign of life then from your father since October 7th, except what you heard from your mother.
No, we know that he's there, but we don't know if he's dead or alive. Okay. I cannot explain how come the Red Cross or NGOs, other NGOs, nobody is able to tell me this basic fact. I find it absolutely horrific, but I'm not the only one. Quite a few of us are in this position.
I'm sure. Now, the ceasefire deal came into force this morning. As part of the deal, around 50 hostages held by Hamas are to be released in the coming hours and days. Does that give you hope?
I know many of the people on the list today. I know them personally. I cannot wait for each person that come back. I cannot wait for the women and children. We miss them so much. Our heart is with their mothers and fathers. This is a horrendous situation. Some of these children will be coming back while their fathers will stay behind. The trauma is indescribable. It crosses through so many circles. I cannot wait to see them. Each one of them is a whole life, and we are preparing to receive them, and we are doing our best. It's a very fragile moment. It's in a scale of horrendousness that we experienced since the 7th of October. The frailty of this is very big. We don't want to speak about it till it happens. We're so aware that some of us will have some of our loved one back and others not. The trauma that will continue because people will have to face the knowledge that their sisters or brothers or fathers died. They do not know much about what is happening, what has happened since. So we can't wait to see them, but this is a ray of light in a great darkness.
Now, Hamas is expected, at least initially, to release women and children only. Are you prepared to have to wait longer for your father's return?
Look, we are a community. We grew together, the children grow together. Being part of this community is that you have bonds that are like family. If there is a queue there, then my father and several others members of the kibbutz fighting to be at the end of it. my father truly believed in this young generation. And so for him, he feels that he's 83, that he had a great life, that he wants those children and their mothers and their fathers and everyone else ahead of him. We are desperate to see him. We miss him so much. But I know the kind of person he is.
Now, we know that you're in contact with some of the other families who are also waiting for news about the possible release of their loved ones. You were mentioning that. The uncertainty and the waiting for all of you must be terrible.
Yeah, I cannot describe it. The life of our loved ones are in the hands of politicians and terrorists in the most immediate way. These are people that have caused such horrificness. They have uprooted us, they have murdered us, they have beheaded us, they raped us, they slaughtered us, they have created a pogrom. We were defenseless against them. So to have your loved one in their hands and in the hands of a very delicate truce and a very delicate exchange of terrorists and civilians is horrific.
Now, in kibbutz near Oz, your parents' home, more than 100 people are thought to have been killed or captured by Hamas on October 7th. After all that happened, do you see a future for your family in Israel?
Israel? Yes, of course. They're very rooted there. This is their home. I think that my father fought for peace all his life. His parents fought for peace. The idea that the two nations would live side by side is something that my parents dedicated their life to. And so I think that a future in Israel would also depend on making peace and finding a way to live side by side. To say from the river to the sea is not applicable. We need to find a way of living side by side. We've made peace with the Germans after the World War II and over generation built relationship. And it's absolutely clear that that is also possible with the Palestinian. Hamas is a horrific terrorist organization that engaged in the worst crimes against humanity. There's no peace possible with people that train themselves to behead babies. There's no peace possible with people that just went out to inflict the maximum trauma on civilians. And so there's no peace with Hamas, but with the Palestinian people, with people like the person my mom shook hand with, absolutely. We will make peace with them. We will have to find a way to live side by side.
That was Sharon Lifschitz speaking to us earlier. Her father is among those hostages believed to be held by Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip. Well, Israel has made clear that despite this 4-day truce deal, the war is not over yet. Earlier, my colleague Terry Martin spoke to Israeli military spokesperson Peter Lerner and asked him what his expectations were from this pause in fighting.
Good morning. Indeed, our forces are in defensive operational lines, regrouping and taking the necessary steps in accordance to the government's instructions. Of course, this is what we expect to follow through over the next few days, but we are continuing to be vigilant and prepared for any eventuality. I'd like to remind you that in not so far away history, we've had ceasefires with Hamas. They've always taken advantage of them to attack and abduct soldiers, kill soldiers. So we are on the go. We are prepared. We're taking the necessary steps, but of course, we are abiding by the instructions of the government.
What will the Israeli military do, Colonel Lerner, if a rocket is fired into Israel during this ceasefire? Because there are concerns that there could be rogue elements in Palestine, that in the Palestinian territories, that want indeed to spoil this ceasefire.
So we have to be, as I said, we are on the defensive positions. We're making the necessary steps in order to be prepared for that. Of course, we won't tolerate attacks against us, and therefore it is, as your reporter rightly pointed out, a very fragile situation on the ground. We are expecting to maintain our positions and maintaining our defensive capabilities. Correctly saying we don't want people returning to the north precisely because this war is not over. We are in a pause, an operational pause that is dictating the way forward. The operation is currently focused on two core things. First of all, getting the hostages out and maintaining, conducting the release of the terrorists and criminals coming out of Israeli prisons. And this is the focus for the next at least 4 days. We will be prepared in order to respond to any aggression against us.
How do you think this pause in the fighting will impact Israel's plans to eliminate Hamas? Is this going to compromise the Israeli military's ability to prosecute its war against Hamas?
No, the war effort will continue. The government has said so. The Prime Minister stated it explicitly. Our role in this is to implement the government policy in order to make sure that Hamas can never wield the sword of death against Israelis ever again. They utilized and abused all of the tools of government in order to build their terrorist capabilities, in order to build the rockets, in order to build the tunnel system, in order to build their terrorist army that infiltrated Israel on the 7th of October. So it doesn't change the end goal. It doesn't change the directive. We are but focused because the two goals of this war go hand in hand. We have to bring home the hostages, and this is what we're focused on today and over the next few days. And we also need to make sure that Hamas never have that power again in order to utilize it against the people of Israel, and I would add, against the people of Gaza as well.
Now, Israeli forces, I understand, are warning displaced Palestinians in Gaza, those who've moved to the south, telling them not to go back to the northern part of the Strip. But I understand that Hamas is telling people, indeed, to go north. Will Israeli soldiers stop Palestinians trying to go north if they attempt it?
We've been very clear, and I think it was part of the agreement. People should not be moving north. We won't permit it. People can continue to go south, but not go to the north. There is a very, very extensive, as you are aware, military presence on the ground. The combat zone is still very active and dangerous. People should not return to the north.
That was IDF spokesperson Peter Lerner speaking to us earlier. Well, many young Israeli soldiers have taken part in the military operation against Hamas in recent weeks, and we want to shed light on what this means for their families. So I can now speak to Karen, an Israeli-American mother of 4. Her 20-year-old son is a member of a special combat unit in Gaza, and for security reasons, we've agreed to not disclose her full name or whereabouts. Welcome to DW News, Karen. Now, the truce that began this morning is expected to last for 4 days. How are you feeling about this, considering it means also a break in the fighting for your son?
Well, from one point, I feel relief, but on the other one, I feel scared because every ceasefire that we had before, Hamas didn't stand with this ceasefire and harmed our soldiers. Even if it's a ceasefire, they kidnapped 2 of our soldiers while they were in ceasefire. So we don't know what to expect.
How often have you been hearing from your son?
Maybe once or twice. And I can hear from him.
You don't have much contact with him. Is there just reasons for that behind it, or is it just that? Tell us a bit more.
When he's inside Gaza, you can't contact him. There is no way you can contact him. The last time that he was out, it was last week. He lost his commander. A sniper shot him while he was looking around to see what's going on. And he took it very seriously because he just killed in his hands. So they took him for a little bit of, how can I say it? just to relax a little bit from what was there. And yeah, I'm not sure, he can't come home, so I can't talk to him. Not all the time he can contact me, so I don't know really what he feels and how he is mentally. And yeah, it's scary. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I understand your daughter will also be joining the army in a few days. How do you feel about this?
It's hard. It's hard. 2 kids in the army and in a war. It's hard. This is not a usual thing that your kids are going to the army to serve Israel. And both of them are in war. I know people that have 7 kids and 6 of them are in a war. 6 of them are soldiers right now.
You mentioned earlier that contact with your son is, you don't have contact with your son very often. Are you regularly briefed about where he is, about how he's doing, about his experience?
I can tell you that you can't sleep at night. During the day, you can't leave your phone because you don't know if he's going to call, if someone will call. You are scared from any call that it's not recognized, so you don't know who's calling you. It can be from the army. And you're afraid that someone will knock on your door and will come and tell you bad news about your kids. So you just try to think positive. And when I was talking to him, he was telling me a horrifying story about what's going on there. That with his value, how he grew up, he was not able to even imagine being in a war in this situation. And the example is that he was telling me, Mom, I was fighting against Hamas that sent their kids and women in front of us, in front of them to fight us. So you don't know who to shoot and what to do right now because you're fighting against Hamas, but their human shield are the kids and the women. So to shoot or not to shoot. And it was very hard for him at the beginning.
Karen, from everything that you're telling us, it sounds like a very difficult situation for a parent to be going through. How are you coping? How do you live your day-to-day with this, as you mentioned, this fear of the phone going and bad news potentially?
So I opened a project of volunteering. We prepared the hot meals for soldiers and for people who had to leave their houses from south and north. And I was volunteering up until 2 days ago when all the donations are over and done. So we were just preparing meals for the soldiers, for the people, and to do everything that you can for your country.
Thank you for talking to us today, Karen, on DW News. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.